Can't think of anywhere else I would want to be this morning, especially on the Sabbath. I can't think of any place else that could even compare with gathering with the saints, which is pretty much what our Torah portion said. Now, before you get too comfortable, why don't you stand up a second? Stand up with me. Now, straighten up. Straighten up your body. Back straight. Shoulders back. Does it hurt a little bit? If you're over the age of 20, it probably hurts a little. What about your arms? Can you stretch those all the way out and get them straight? Are your feet straight? Everything's straight. Now can you be loose too at the same time? Everything's straight and loose. Now am I the only one here that can feel something a little uncomfortable when I pinch my shoulders back? Feel something uncomfortable? Raise your hand. Okay, that's most of us. Great. I'm not the only old lady in the house. Okay, you can be seated. The name of the portion today is HaBrakha, which means this is the blessing. The traditional readings for those who are watching on IsraelNet are Deuteronomy 33:1 through 34:12. Today we read Psalm 38. The traditional Haftorah is Joshua 1:1 through 1:18, and we added Jonah 4:5 through 11, and Luke 13:1 through 16. And this is just kind of the beginning. This is to set the foundation. And what I want to do is finish it up tomorrow evening. We're having service at 7 o'clock tomorrow night, and then service at 7 o'clock Monday night as well to Sharon Yom Kippur, and then to see it out together as a congregation. This is the blessing. That's an interesting way of looking at, we're always seeking after the blessing. We want the good things, right? And yet it's written for us. Those blessings are written there. The title of the message today, which I guess is part 1, is Straighten Up and Fly Right. You see how hard it is to get straight, don't you? It's a little painful. Things pop and kind of click and so forth. There's a few gymnasts in the crowd, I think, but they'll get old too. So if we have a blessing, what is that blessing? The clue was in the name that was used for Israel. Did you hear that? It's a hard name to say. It doesn't just flow out of your mouth like Israel. The name was Yeshua. Yeshua. That is not a name that's just easy to say. We hear a lot of mispronunciations of it, but it's Yeshua. Yeshua. And basically what it means is to be straight, to be upright, straight as an arrow. And that's the blessing with which we were blessed. That's the name of blessing that was put on us in this Torah portion. And that blessing is to be straight, to be strong, and to be healthy. Physically, spiritually, emotionally, in every way you can see in those blessings that Adonai intends for us to be blessed by being straight, by being strong. So if you have a crooked back, or if you have arthritic hands, or if you have weak feet, weak legs, in a physical sense, you may not be able to heal yourself. You may have to go to a physician and have him work with you and to do some diagnosis and to prescribe some exercises or possibly do surgery. There are human physicians that can help us along with healing these weak backs and arthritic hands and weak legs. And we can also pray for healing. We can go to the elders of the congregation and they will lay hands on you and pray for your healing. But on the other hand, what if it is our souls that are crooked? What if it's our souls that are arthritic? That comes with old age. How many of you have been around a while? Maybe you've been, a believer and a follower of Yeshua most of your life. What are the odds that your soul will not eventually become arthritic as time goes on? What if your soul is weak? What if you're just tired? You heard the message today. Don't be weary in well-doing. It's easy to say, it's easy to hear, but it's not so easy to do. Life just beats it out of you. But the scripture, the commandment says, don't be weary. And you say, well, how can you command me not to be weary if I'm weary? Well, evidently it is under our control in some way. So we are not to be weary. We are to try to approach our healing with Yeshua's help, whether it's in the physical sense, whether we're going to a physician and we're adding prayer along with that, a prayer of faith, or whether it's a healing that needs to take place in our soul. We still need to approach Yeshua with that need. The flesh is the last thing that's going to be resurrected. But in Yeshua, illnesses of the soul can be rectified on Yom Kippur. Or maybe they can even be rectified here today with your cooperation. Very rarely did Yeshua sneak up on someone and heal them. He usually allowed them to see him or to hear him. He had a conversation with them. But he wasn't, a stealth healer. Are we going to be able to approach Yeshua in the proper way today and to stretch out our hands to obtain that healing of the soul? And this is a blessing that you can enjoy today in all its fullness. It's available to you, and I'm going to show you that it is available to you. And in some cases, I believe that physical healing will follow when we seek after healing of our souls, when we try to straighten that which was bent. I have known in my own life that when I healed things in my soul, that a physical healing followed. Not instantly, but it gradually began to rectify itself as we empty out sometimes that poison, that vine of Sodom that's in our souls. Then it allows a chance for the Holy Spirit to come in and to heal us even physically. You can enjoy this blessing. Maybe not instantly, but maybe today is the start toward that straightening what was bent. Did you know that even in the medical literature there's a very strong connection between crippling arthritis and stress, anger, fear, resentment, that emotions seem to have some connection to crippling arthritis? And what is anger? What is resentment? What would that have to do with anything? Well, we know we feel anger and we feel resentment when we feel sad, when we feel afraid, when we feel like we're out of control over the things that seem to be acting upon us, when we feel helpless. If we were to read about anger in Scripture, it's often described as a scorching wind and heat. Boy, did Jonah have a problem with anger. I mean, it withered up his vine overnight. So, what if we heal these scorching winds of resentment, the scorching winds of fear, of anger, of sadness, of despair? Is it possible that if we can heal these scorching hot winds, and wind in Hebrew is ruach, or spirit, so these angry spirits, spirits of bitterness, resentment, fear, depression, and so forth, if we could heal those things, is it possible that maybe even physical arthritis would improve? over time. If we heal that scorching wind of resistance, is it possible that we may also stop inhibiting the growth of those whose lives we affect? Because you see that scorching wind, that resentment and anger and bitterness, it affected even the way that Jonah interacted with the people of Nineveh. He didn't want them to repent. He didn't want them to be saved. Don't tell me that your resentment and your anger and your bitterness and your sadness and your fears don't affect other people. They do. Those are pretty hot winds for them to deal with. Have you ever heard the expression, a withering look? Have you ever looked at someone that way? I have. Alan used to call it the electric eye. And my students could probably describe that to you as well. I mean, and that is exactly what that look is intended to do. You're trying to control someone with a look and say, stop that. You know, it might be as simple as turn back around in your desk and get started back on your assignment. Or it might be something much more sinister when we use those withering looks. Have you ever felt that look upon you?
Yes.
I mean, okay, maybe mine, but anybody. Have you ever felt somebody give you a withering, scorching, hot look, and you knew that you had made them angry? You know, I think I've received some looks that could probably scorch a redwood forest. I mean, they were strong, they were powerful. But think of these hot winds. Think of these winds that blow over us. What if arthritis does run in your family? Is it possible also that if we look into our family tree, not only will this arthritis appear in our families, maybe there's a spirit of anger, a spirit of depression, a spirit of fear, sadness, whatever it might be. Is there a scorching wind that's also popping up in each generation? Maybe we need to deal with that as much as a physician needs to deal with our arthritis, so that we will not be cursed with a generational curse, but be blessed with a generational blessing. We can stop the connection now and pass on to our children a different kind of spirit than anger and bitterness. What about heart disease? What are the contributing factors of heart disease? Well, it can be a congenital defect. You can be born with a heart murmur or some sort of malfunction of the heart, another generational curse. You kind of inherit it, if you will. It becomes an inheritance for you. Not really the inheritance your parents intended for you to receive, but nevertheless it's an inheritance. What causes heart disease? It might be obesity. Remember when it said Yeshua grew fat and kicked? Well, that kind of backfires sometimes. Sometimes it's too much rich food. Sometimes it's stress. Sometimes it's fear. It's lack of exercise. There's any number of things that can contribute to heart disease. And we know what the consequences of physical heart disease are, but what are the consequences of our soul's heart disease? Do we think that we can walk around with diseases of our spiritual heart, our soul, and not be affected? And what are those things that are going to contribute to the diseases of the spiritual heart? If we want to enjoy this blessing and be disease-free, I think we have to learn first what it means to be called Yeshua. What does that mean? Who are we? That's a strange name for a people. But Yeshua means straight ones. You ever heard somebody described as a straight arrow? You don't even try with that one, right? They don't play games. It's straight down the line. They're going to do everything by the book. Wouldn't we like to be Adonai's straight arrows? Wouldn't we like to do everything by the book? Wouldn't we like to be the ones that he doesn't even have to look? He just pulls an arrow from his quiver, loads it in the bow, and he sends it straight to the mark. He doesn't have to look and check and see if this arrow is bent, because he knows it's straight when he takes it out of his quiver, and he sends it wherever it needs to go to take his word. Wouldn't that be Yeshua? Straight ones? But how many of us are just a tad bit off And when we try to hit the mark, we end up, it may just be a fraction off when the arrow leaves the bow, but give it enough space and its feet away from the mark, and we realize that we've hit so far away from the mark that we can't even believe that that's what we were trying to hit in the first place. I would like to be one of those straight arrows. I would like to hit the mark every time in every situation. But we're human, aren't we? But wouldn't it be wonderful to be his inheritance, his Yerash? That's the way that it's described in the Torah portion. And as Tammy was chanting it, she used the word morasha. Morasha comes from the root word Yerash. Yerash is straight. It's an inheritance. It's if you were to pass something along to your children, whether it's a bank account, a house, land, property, whatever, it's an inheritance. It's what you pass on. Those were the inheritances of these tribes as she read them. And if we move the letters around just a little bit, we come up with the word yashar, which means to be absolutely straight. It can fly to the center of the mark. The only difference between being an inheritance, a Yerash, and being straight in Hebrew is the order of the letters. But they both begin with the yad, with the hand. So what does that mean? There is a flashing lightning at the right hand of the Father, and his name is Yeshua. He is the one who is now seated at the right hand. But he is the flashing lightning. He is what we received from the right hand of the Father. And so the yad is the key to understanding, whether we're trying to understand our inheritance, our blessings, or whether we're trying to understand what it means to be a straight arrow. See, it said in the portion that the Holy One held us in his hand, and then we received a flashing lightning from his right hand. That's where we are. We have Yeshua at the same time that we're being held in his hand. It has to start with your hands, with your yadayim, yad. And as you see Yeshua flashing lightning of insight in this portion, your job is to stretch out your hand and see what happens. See, I've got the easy job. All I have to do is shed a little light on how Yeshua appears in this portion. But you've got the hard job, you've got the time-consuming job, you've got the soul-searching job of deciding whether to reach out your hand and take a hold of that flashing lightning. Yom Kippur gives us the opportunity to work on our crooked arrows. And what is a true arrow? It's a straight arrow. In Hebrew, an arrow is chetz. Chetz. It's chet and tzadik sofi. If we were to write that out, if we were to break the letters down and say this is what this letter means and this is what this letter means, the chet means life, right? And the tzadik, sofi, is a righteous one. It's a tzaddik. It's a saint. It's a holy one. So that's what an arrow is. It's someone who has a life of holiness, a life of righteousness. That's what it means to be a straight arrow. Yesharun. And there again, it comes from the verb there that means upright, to make straight. It's a symbolic name for Israel that's going to describe her ideal character. Let's reread the salient passages. It says, "Now this is the blessing which Moshe, the man of God, blessed the sons of Israel before his death. So the Lord came from Sinai and dawned on them from Seir. He shone forth from Mount Paran, and he came from the midst of 10,000 holy ones. At his right hand there was flashing lightning for them. Indeed, he loves the people. All your holy ones are in your hand, and they followed in your steps. Everyone receives of your words. Moshe charged us with the Torah, a possession." That word there is morasha, from Yerash, which is an inheritance. This Torah is our inheritance for the assembly of Yaakov. He does not say it's for individuals. even though it is. When we are described as Yeshua, when we are ideal, when we are those straight arrows, when we are gaining our inheritance, we are described as the assembly of Jacob. That's when you can realize your inheritance, in the assembly. And it says he was king in Yeshurun. When we are together, he is the king in Yeshurun. When we are fractured, when we are divided, when we are islands unto ourselves, it does not say he is king in Yeshurun. It's only when we're together, as that assembly of Jacob. When he was king in Yeshurun, when the heads of the people were gathered and the tribes of Israel together, Yachad, when we are together, that is when he is king in Yeshurun. It says in 33:26, there is none like the God of Yeshurun, who rides the heavens to your help, and through the skies in his majesty. The eternal God is a dwelling place, and underneath are the everlasting arms. And he drove out the enemy from before you and said, destroy. So Israel dwells in security, the fountain of Jacob secluded in a land of grain and new wine. His heavens also drop down dew. Blessed are you, O Israel. Who is like you, a people saved by the Lord? Who is the shield of your help and the sword of your majesty? So your enemies will cringe before you, and you will tread upon their high places. This is Yeshua. These are straight arrows. These are upright people. The Torah with which we are charged in 33:4 is that marasha. It's the inheritance. We have everything we need right here to break generational curses if we have an inheritance of holiness. This inheritance from Yerash means to seize, to take a hold of. You don't have to do something. If you want your inheritance, it'll sit there all day, but until you reach out and take it, it's not really yours. It means to dispossess. It might mean that someone has illegally taken possession of your inheritance. That means you might have to go take it back because it's rightfully yours. This Torah was removed from us for so many centuries, but we have begun to take possession back. We are beginning to take these words and say they're ours. They are ours. They don't belong to anyone else. They're ours. They belong to everyone who's willing to live under this covenant. This is our inheritance. We are going to occupy this land. We are heirs. You know, how many times did we quote those verses about being co-heirs and sons and daughters and so forth, but we always thought we were second best to another people? No. An inheritance. It's yours. It's in your hand if you'll reach out and take it. You might have to take it back, but take it. You know, even Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, the first three letters are Yod, Resh, Shin, Yerash. It's your inheritance. Being a part of New Jerusalem is to be part of that inheritance. The assembly of the righteous where he is king in Yeshurun. We can even break this down into letters because every letter means something. Yerash can be broken down to Yod, Resh, Shin. Yod is your hand, Yod. Resh is your head, symbol of authority. And Shin refers to your teeth, your ability to chew up something and digest it and take it into your body for nourishment. So the essence of this inheritance, this Yerash that belongs to Yeshurun, is to receive this from the hand of Adonai, which we recognize this as Yeshua, to submit to his authority and to the teachings that are found in here, and then to begin to digest those teachings until they become part of who we are. In a sense, we don't have to carry the Torah scroll anymore. Once we've taken it inside, we are a living Torah scroll. That's what we want to do, to take this as our inheritance, because it no longer belongs to someone else. It no longer exists outside of us. It exists inside of us. If we invert this word then, this inheritance word, this Yerash, just switch the letters around a little bit. Leave the first letter the same, the Yod, the hand. We can make the word Yeshar, which means straight, as in a straight path. It can also mean level or upright. The way we were trying to stand was yashar. What does that mean? Again, it's the hand. It's the sheen. It's the rosh. To be straight, we have to do things in a little bit different order. The first way is an inheritance. We didn't work too hard for that. It was a little more passive. But if we look at Yeshar, first of all, we still have to reach the hand out and take that teaching of Yeshua. But first, we digest it. We use the teeth, the sheen, before we actually completely submit to it with the rosh, with the head. That's what happened. See, with the inheritance, we submitted to it here and said, okay, but we didn't really begin to digest it until the end. But to be straight, to move from an inheritance to being that straight arrow, we're going to invert it just a little bit. And what we're going to say is that we're going to be like the Bereans. We're going to reach out our hand and we're going to take a hold of this. But what are we going to do? We're going to search this thing out. God does not ask you to ignore empirical evidence. He asks you to interpret it in light of His Holy Spirit. We don't have to disregard anything in order to accept this by faith. He's made provision for us. So what we're going to say is, first we're going to take it in our hands, then we're going to digest it. We're going to search it out and we're going to investigate it. We'll go ahead and we're going to take it in. And then once having gained full understanding of what we're doing and being fully persuaded in our minds, then we can fully submit in our lives. And then we will again be straight arrows. We will have that holiness. It makes us a stronger disciple. One should not be discarded in favor of the other. We shouldn't say this is an inheritance and do nothing with it. We should move from the inheritance to learning how to be a straight arrow. From simply saying, yes, I will do and I will hear, but then move to a stage of discipleship where we say we will seek it out, and as we understand it, then we will begin to walk with it in power. That makes us stronger as a disciple because we become straight. We can stand up straight without popping things. I think my shoulder's still aching from that one. We're going to try it again. I'm going to ask you to pinch those shoulders together and see what happens to you. Because we need to be reminded how painful it is to become a straight arrow once we, aren't gymnasts anymore. Now, is it better to be an inheritance than a straight arrow? Like I said, you don't discard one in favor of the other. From a passage that we read week before last in 1 Kings 8:53, remember King Shlomo is praying for Israel. And he says about them, for you have separated them from all the peoples of the earth as your inheritance or heritage. It depends what English version you're reading. As you spoke through Moshe your servant when you brought our fathers forth from Egypt, O Lord God. He says, as your inheritance or as your heritage. This is a different word than what we're talking about. The Yerusha, the inheritance, is a little bit different from a Nachala, which King Shlomo is talking about. The Nachala is a heritage. An inheritance, the Yerusha, it's the property of you. If you are the heir, if you receive this property, you can do with it whatever you want to do with it. And from there we get the story of the prodigal son. You can have an inheritance, you can give it away, you can squander it, you can spend it, you can invest it and make more out of it. You can do all sorts of things with an inheritance. You can pay off your bills, you can get out of debt, whatever level you want to think about it. You could even just neglect it and let it go to pot, go to ruin, get weedy. But the heritage, the thing that King Shlomo is talking about, belongs to the nation for all eternity. It doesn't really change depending on how badly you manage your inheritance or how well you manage your inheritance. Solomon was asking Adonai to regard Israel as a heritage, a nachala, which he must cherish and protect even when we are not behaving very yerash. And that's good news for us. because Lord knows we had neglected our inheritance much of our lives. But nevertheless, we are His heritage. He's going to hang on to us and protect us and cherish us through that. But to us, this is a Yerash, an inheritance. And it's our choice whether we want to squander it, give it away to someone else and say it's not mine, whether we want to let someone steal that word out of our hearts, whether we want to be like the prodigal son and become so much a friend to the world that we wake up one morning and there is no more Torah to fall back on. We're utterly destitute. But what if we're like the other son? He was faithful to the letter of the Torah, wasn't he? He was a good son. He honored his father. But he lived like a slave to it. He didn't have any fun. He had no freedom. It was like a bondage to him. It was a total obligation, and he did not receive the joy that comes along with this inheritance. This is not for funerals. This is for dancing. This is for joy. This is for festivals. This is for encouragement. This is for kindness and uplifting and helping others to straighten up. That's what this is for. But both sons became bent. One was bent over from the weight of sin, but the other one was bent over from the weight of simply following the letter of the Torah out of obligation. We cannot waste our inheritance either way we approach it. The only way to approach this Torah is through Yeshua. In one case, we might throw away the riches of the kingdom. In the other case, we had access to the riches of the kingdom the whole time and we refused to tap into it. Our liturgy often says that Adonai straightens all the bent. He's powerful enough to straighten us out so that we can ride with Him in the heavens as Yeshua. But if we want to do that, and I'll speak more to it tomorrow night at Yom Kippur, because I want to show you the difference, or show you why it took 2 goats to make atonement, and how each of those goats is part of what we go through when we're dealing with sin and trying to do surgery for sin. What we should not do is try to resist the surgeries that have to take place to straighten our bent and twisted lower nature. In the Torah portion we read last week, Israel was called a twisted and crooked generation. They weren't Yeshua and they were twisted. So surgery, or maybe even death, might be needed if we are going to straighten up in a spiritual sense some things like scoliosis of the soul. Everybody know what scoliosis is? It's when your spine's not quite straight. What about osteoporosis? We're so bent and weighted down with the cares of the world that we get twisted. Maybe it's a generational curse. Maybe we inherited it from our parents. Maybe it was the weight of the world that bent us over. Maybe it was scorching winds, and we just didn't know how to deal with those scorching winds of fear, anger, depression, and so forth. What if our hands are twisted? What if we have arthritis? What if they're weak? What if they just don't work correctly and we're always dropping things? Dropping the ball. What if our feet are lame? What if they're twisted? What if we've lost our footing in the kingdom? What if we become too earthbound to walk upright and to walk straight? We're kind of reduced to our animal instincts because animals don't walk upright. They walk on all fours, or 8s, or however many they might have in the animal kingdom. It's our posture as human beings that sets us aside, that sets us apart from the animal world. Because the upright posture of a man is so awkward, scientists describe it as a series of controlled falls. You want to try to understand how precarious we actually are when we stand on our 2 feet or when we try to walk? Watch these little kids when they're learning how to walk. How many times do they fall and hit their head on the coffee table when they're trying to walk? Because they're trying to manage, even at its best, a series of controlled falls. When they move from the animal kingdom, scrambling around on all fours, to standing upright, they're moving to another level. A series of controlled falls. It's a divine ability, I believe. When we go from crawling to walking, I believe God is there. Because we need Him to learn how to walk on 2 feet that we're really not designed to walk on. When you look at the physiology of a human being, it should be very hard for us to even walk, much less run, leap, and do all the things that we are able to do because of the marvelous creation that we are. But we have divine ability to stay in balance. In spite of our anatomy, in spite of gravity, we manage to stand and walk. And spiritually, it is Yeshua in whom we learn to balance in a series of controlled falls. And with Him, we can walk against all logic of our fallen nature, against all logic of our anatomy. In Him, we can live, move, walk, and have being. Here's what a medical website had to say about normal human walking. It said, among other things, human ambulation left the hands free to use tools, encouraging the development of an increased mental capacity. You're smarter than an animal because you're free to use your hands. And that can increase. Now you can do a whole lot more things. You're not limited, and the more you do things, the more your brain works. It's like a muscle. The more you use it, the better it does, right? Your hands are free so you can learn to do more things. A human's walking pattern can be as individual as a fingerprint. Some factors that influence one individual's gait from another include your muscle strength, your tendon and bone length, bone density, how sharp your vision is, coordination skills, experience, body mass, your center of gravity, muscle or bone damage, physiological conditions, and simply a personal walking style. You walk like no other person on earth. Although I'll have to say, if you put Alan Elwine and Murray Elwine side by side and watched them walk down the sidewalk, you'd have a pretty hard time figuring which was which, because the walks are pretty much the same. But each one of us has an individual gait that depends on certain variables: surface, confidence, mood, the quantity and quality of light. You walk differently in a dark room than you do in the daylight. Depends on noise. It depends on distraction. Chemical effects. What kind of drugs have you put in your body? Energy levels, your mental alertness, muscle fatigue. All of these will affect the way that you walk in a physical sense. But couldn't we also say that how we choose to walk with Yeshua affects our spiritual intelligence and how we walk with Him? That how straight we can walk with Yeshua as a straight arrow is determined not by physical vision so much as spiritual vision, what we can see beyond the horizon that makes it worth getting up and walking there. Our conditioning, how well do we condition ourselves? And how do we condition ourselves in a spiritual sense? If you never exercise, you're not going to make it very far. Your alertness, are you paying attention? Or are we going back to just things happen to you because you're not paying attention? How much energy do you have? It depends on which day how much energy I have. In a physical sense and in a spiritual sense. I can run 2 miles one day and I'll feel like I'm dying. I can get back on the track next day. Nothing's changed. My diet was pretty much the same. Nothing changed. But I can run 2 miles and I know I could run 2 more. What's the difference? I don't know. Part of it is our style. The way that we walk with Yeshua is our style. Each of us has our own way of walking with Him. Are we going to allow bent, twisted, and weak limbs to destroy the blessing with which we are blessed? That's to be straight, to be upright, to be able to control that series of falls with the help of Yeshua. Because these bent, twisted, and weak limbs can destroy also the blessing of the grain in the new wine. That was part of the blessing. Yeshua came to heal these diseases so that our grain would not be withered and scorched by the wind, so that we would come to full maturity. See, if a hot wind hits the wheat and the barley, got too hot and too hard at certain times of year, it will never come to maturity. It will stop right there and it will never grow anymore. Have we been stopped in our growth to maturity by hot, scorching winds, by emotions that bring us to a certain point and we quit growing because we get sad, we get angry, we get fearful, we get depressed? Or have we grown to full maturity in areas so that we are sheaves that the King of Kings is going to be pleased to come bearing in His kingdom? He is the one who can ensure that our new wine is a wine of joy and gladness resulting from obedience, not the produce of His wrath and His judgment. There's two different kinds of wine. One of them is a wine of wrath, but another one is gladness and joy. Deuteronomy 32:5 says, they have acted corruptly toward Him. They are not His children because of their defect, but are a perverse. That's the Hebrew word ikesh. It means distorted and twisted, and crooked. That's petaltol, which means tortuously twisted generation. Wow. So what would cause us to twist, to bend, and to wither on the stalk or wither on the vine? It gives us some clues. Number one, in Deuteronomy 32:15, it's spiritual obesity. We can get too fat. It says, Yeshua grew fat and kicked. You're grown fat, thick, and sleek. Then he forsook God who made him and scorned the rock of his salvation. Have we been overfed on Torah? You know, when you're hungry, you seem to do a little bit better than you're walking than when you're overfed, too fat. You don't want to walk when you just ate. You want to take a nap. Leave me alone. I'm sleepy. I need my nap. You can't think when your belly is full because all your blood's going down here into the digestive system. Your brain gets deprived. Sometimes we need to be hungry for the Torah to improve our walk. Maybe we're overfed. We're getting way more than we can eat, way more than we can digest. And once you've had more than enough, over time you'll get fat on it, and then it says you'll forsake God. Number two is the hot, angry spirits of judgment. We can look at Isaiah 16:8. It says, for the fields of Heshbon have withered, the vines of Sibnah as well. The lords of the nations have trampled down its choice clusters, which reached as far as Yazer and wandered to the deserts. Its tendrils spread themselves out and passed over the sea. Revelation 16:8, the fourth angel poured out his bowl upon the sun, and it was given to scorch men with fire. These hot, angry spirits of judgment can wither us on the vine. We need to do an emotion check. We need to check to see if we're out of balance in our emotion. With spirits of judgment, are we harsh in our judgment of one another? Are we giving one another withering looks? Are we saying withering words that are intended to dry up courage instead of to instill courage into us to take the next step forward? Number three is faithless shepherding. Might be your leader's fault. This is a minister who leaves his flock without the healing power of the word. How do I know this? It says in Zechariah 11:17, woe to the worthless shepherd who leaves the flock. A sword will be on his arm and on his right eye. His arm will be totally withered and his right eye will be blind. You see, Yeshua healed a man in a synagogue. And in so doing, it says that he shamed the leaders of the synagogue. Why? Because they were withholding healing from a man on the Sabbath day. They were faithless shepherds. They would allow him to wither on the vine and saying it's because the Sabbath day that we are not willing to minister a word of healing to you. Of all days, you should receive words of the Torah, healing and encouragement on the Sabbath day. They were faithless shepherds who abandoned him to spiritual poverty. Yeshua gave him the word. Yeshua said, stretch out your hand. Do something. If we ever leave the synagogue withered up, we can blame one or two people. We can say that that shepherd didn't minister the word today. and he or she will fall under judgment for that. But if we leave here and we are not healed, and we know that the word was brought forth, maybe we didn't stretch out our hands and accept the word as it was ministered for our healing. In the Sunday evening service for Yom Kippur, I want to tell you more about these 3 diseases of the Spirit and how to deal with them on Yom Kippur in the most effective way. There's 2 ways we can deal with it. There's 2 prescribed methods, but one of them is definitely better than the other, because you have a choice. You have an option of 2 things which are part of your inheritance. With one choice, you're just going to maintain the status quo. Move along this year just like you did last year. But the other choice is going to be life. It's going to be true healing. So, stand up on your feet. I always wonder why people say stand on your feet. What else are you supposed to stand on? Your head, maybe? Don't stand on your head. Stretch out your hands. You feel anything? No, I mean really stretch them. Don't just hold them out. Straighten up your spine. Pinch your shoulders together. Those 2 little shoulder blades, pull them back toward each other. Straighten up your back. Find that center of gravity, your center of balance. Relax. Did you feel something kind of pop again? But wasn't it easier the second time? Yeah, you're a little looser. I'm going to reread Luke 13, 11 through 16. It says, "Behold, there was a woman who for 18 years had had a sickness caused by a spirit." What was it? Was it anger? Was it resentment, depression, fear? I don't know. It doesn't say what the spirit was. But it says she was bent double and couldn't straighten up at all. Hey, we're way ahead of her. Okay? We can at least stand up straight and try to be straight. And when Yeshua saw her, he called her over and said to her, "Woman, you are freed from your sickness." And he laid his hands upon her, and immediately she was made erect again and began glorifying God. And the synagogue official, indignant because Yeshua had healed on the Sabbath, began saying to the multitude in response, "There are 6 days in which work should be done. Therefore come during them and get healed, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord, it doesn't say Yeshua, it says, "But the Lord answered him and said, you hypocrites, does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or donkey from the stall and lead him away to water? And this woman, a daughter of Abraham as she is," this is a woman who has a heritage of Adonai, who was offered Yeshua, who was offered the living Torah as an inheritance. "Ought not she, whom Satan has bound for 18 long years, should she not have been released on the Sabbath day?" That's what you're here for. You're here to be released from any bondage on the Sabbath day. It's you and Yeshua right now. Don't wait for Yom Kippur if you don't have to. It's the Sabbath day. It's you and Yeshua. Are your hands as strong and flexible and open as they should be today? What about your feet? When you watch me walk, do I look tired? Do I stumble around because I'm not watching where I'm going? Am I bent over from spirits of resentment and fear? Does it hurt to straighten your back up and really stand up straight? Or have we grown so fat on the Torah that we're too heavy for a long journey anyway? Today and Yom Kippur are appointed times. They are Sabbaths for your healing, for your restoration, to be a heritage of Adonai. And you, Yeshurun, can seize that inheritance today. You're Yerusha. And you can be made as straight as an arrow, Yeshar, to hit the mark of the living Torah like flashing lightning in every situation of your life. It's available. Straighten up, Yeshurun, and fly straight into those everlasting arms.